I am Camilla Rocha, 28 years old, and December used to mean polished smiles and careful small talk. In the Rocha family, appearances were a language, and I learned it well enough to pass, until the night I stopped translating myself. As the one who chose numbers over narratives, I always felt like the wrong line in their perfect script. My sister's luxury engagement was planned like a campaign: scripted arrivals, curated angles, a rooftop garden under glass. I arrived early, still hoping that effort might equal belonging. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't chase gossip. I follow receipts. But that night, the room told on itself before the numbers did. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been treated like background in your own family's story. The Rochas of São Paulo were known for three things: tidy reputations, well-timed achievements, and standards that sounded like love when spoken softly. My father, Mauro, built towers from balance sheets and lectures about merit. My mother, Helena, curated causes and calendars with the same precision she used on table linens. My sister, Bianca, turned public relations into religion, every moment a message, every message a mirror. And then there was me. I finished university, fell in love with audit trails, and felt alive in a way parties never made me feel. While they rehearsed speeches, I learned to hear what payments were saying. I rented a small apartment, built a client list, and paid my bills with work that left paper trails cleaner than conversations at home. At family gatherings, my reality was brushed aside with lines like, "She's still finding her lane," said with a smile that felt like a gate. The elevator to the rooftop was a clear tube through winter. I had done my breathing at home, 4 in, 7 holding, 8 out, while my dog, Bento, pressed his warm head against my shin until my hands stopped shaking. No gin, just water. I knew the price of shortcuts, interest due in the morning. At check-in, a hostess with a perfect bun moved people without moving them. Ivory wristbands slid to guests. Black wristbands slid to staff. She read my name, looked at my face, and held up black. She suggested the service entrance and added that staff should avoid hero shots. It wasn't cruel. It was certain. Certainty can bruise more than cruelty. I felt the old heat climb. State your surname, correct the mistake, make it easy for them. And then I didn't. I slipped the wristband on and watched how quickly the room accepted the decision. A planner's eyes skimmed over me like a cable to be taped down. A cousin weighed me and set me in the mental storeroom. My mother floated on compliments that sounded like lace over wire. My father held a timeline like a gavel. Bianca glowed in borrowed adjectives. I walked the perimeter the way I read ledgers, quietly, thoroughly. The venue manager checked his watch too often. A florist muttered about a transfer that hadn't cleared. A lighting tech trimmed a circuit and called it optimization. My body wanted to call it threat. My training called it data. By the glass, the city ran its own audit. Headlights, sirens, a law firm logo. Contracts are only stories with signatures. If the story is wrong, you don't beg the narrator, you find the clause. I set the gift box I had brought on a side table and felt my own pulse even out. The black band stayed where it was. I didn't chase a chair. I chose a vantage point. And in that moment, I decided to believe what I was seeing instead of hoping for what I wanted to feel. There was no handbook in our house, but the rules were clear. Success came in one shape, happiness had one lane, and the love that counted was tied to performance. If you matched the pattern, you were celebrated. If you drifted, you were corrected. Birthdays taught it better than speeches. Promotions drew long toasts. Admissions and awards became centerpieces. When it was my turn, the praise was brief and soon followed by questions about when I would take life seriously. The things that made me breathe easier were treated like decoration, pleasant, but not built to carry weight. I learned to shrink. At dinners, I used short answers. When relatives asked about my work, I offered safe sentences: review, reconcile, advise. I left out the details that invite lectures disguised as concern. My mother described me to guests as still finding a lane. My father made comments within earshot about people mistaking tasks for careers. I laughed with the table and stored the sting for later, sharp but hidden. Silence felt like protection. It wasn't. It became permission. Every time I let their version stand, it hardened into something everyone could lean on. I watched myself become useful and adjustable, never central. They did not see the late nights, the spreadsheets, the steady patience it takes to make numbers and stories agree. They didn't see it because it did not fit their blueprint. I tried to fit once. I enrolled in a prep course to signal a corporate track. I memorized frameworks, color tabs, and phrases that sound confident in glass rooms. When I told my parents, relief softened their shoulders. I slept badly for weeks. On the morning after a mock exam, I opened a file from a small nonprofit that needed help tracing a budget leak. Halfway through aligning receipts with timestamps, my ribs loosened. I wrote their findings, felt like myself again, and did not return to the course. Still, December kept pulling me back, not for lights or photos, but for a thread of hope that refused to break. Maybe if I arrived early, dressed correctly, and brought thoughtful gifts, they would pause long enough to actually see me. I ironed dresses, tied ribbons, rehearsed polite updates. Most years I drove home heavier than I left. Outside their rooms, I was not invisible. Clients booked me months ahead. I followed paper trails through messy systems and turned confusion into clear diagrams. Reviews said I made evidence feel simple without making people feel small. Friends asked to learn my process, not to justify it. In the world I build each day, I am real. Inside my family's world, I am a pencil sketch erased before the lines can darken. The gap widened year after year. I lived as two versions, the one who found truth in receipts, and the one who smiled and nodded while others discussed real achievements. The second survived on surface. The first kept me whole. Bento learned the difference by sound. Keys in the lock could mean a day that added up or a day that didn't. If I sank to the floor before turning on the light, he pressed his weight against my leg until my breath evened out. If I stayed standing, he did a small circle and waited for his leash. Either way, I moved again. I'm honest about the nights I poured a second drink to quiet the noise. It wasn't celebration. It was a short vacation from feeling. Lately, I've been more honest about stopping after the first. Mornings are kinder when I don't owe interest to last night. Therapy helped there. My therapist said patterns survive because they serve someone. Shrinking served the weather at home. It kept storms off the table. It did not keep me. I started writing simple lines in a black notebook, the way I mark a ledger. Shrinking doesn't keep peace, it removes me from the picture. Evidence is not rude. Proximity is not love. Choose what to preserve. Names are not ecosystems. I tested these ideas in small scenes. When my mother framed me as still refining, I recorded it as data, not destiny. When my father praised decisiveness and looked past me, I marked the glance as baseline, not verdict. When my sister edited an awkward moment into better content, I corrected the date in my head and let the edit pass without volunteering to play along. Not fighting every detail isn't surrender. Sometimes it's allocation. So when the hostess lifted the black wristband at the engagement check-in, it didn't shock me. Labels are common. What changed was my willingness to believe the numbers of my own life. The entries had aligned into a flow I could no longer ignore. If a room insists I'm support, I will choose what I support. Not their image, but my plan. If a story puts me in the background, I will choose where to stand when the camera moves. I don't need them to hand me a seat I already learned to stand without. I need a clear view, a steady hand, and proof. The rest, I can build. I treated the days after the wristband like I treat a messy ledger. No rushing, no guesses, only passes through the data until the pattern shows itself. I kept my phone face down and my notebook open. The first page held the line I had written at the door. Move like a witness, not a wound. The second page got a new line. Use silence as a tool, not a cage. I started with what I could verify. The venue's public filings, the supplier lists on invoices my sister had posted in a behind-the-scenes story weeks earlier. The fine print on the Rooftop's website that most people scroll past. Policies hide in plain sight. I mapped deadlines against the date of the engagement and marked the times where failure turns into fees. My work brain clicked into place. The fear that buzzed under my skin quieted enough for details to come through. Bento followed me from chair to chair like a soft metronome. When my mind tried to sprint, he yawned in a way that pulled me back to the room. I took breaks the same way I take breaks at the bench. Timer set, water first, coffee if needed, 2 minutes at the window, no phone. I wrote a short note that I did not want to write. Limit alcohol to 1 if I had to be in a crowd. None if I needed my edges sharp. I was tired of paying tomorrow for relief I barely felt tonight. Evidence began to stack. A florist's public complaint about late transfers, posted at an odd hour and then deleted. A vendor roster that changed midweek, which usually means money slid from one line to another. A staff reduction policy that could be triggered by partial payment, something the marketing copy never mentions. None of this was illegal. It was just fragile. Fragile systems perform beautifully right up until they don't. I sent Rafa a short message. Without drama, I told him I needed a second pair of eyes on a clause about staged reductions and a timing grid that did not line up. He replied that he would look that night and asked me to send the PDFs in order. He added that clarity is calmer than confrontation, which is exactly the tone I needed. I filed the message in the drawer of my mind marked, useful sentences. With the paperwork set, I replayed the room in my head. The hostess certain in her categories, the manager checking his watch, the lighting tech trimming a circuit and calling it optimization, the way my mother's compliments landed soft but held shape like wire, the way my father moved through a timeline like someone who believes time belongs to him, the way my sister's smile had a hard edge when a camera was near. None of this was new. What was new was my refusal to edit it into something gentler. Silence helped, not the old silence that swallowed me, but a working silence that let other people's choices echo long enough to hear them clearly. I did not correct the wristband. I did not ask for a seat. I did not offer context that would make anyone more comfortable. I took notes. I breathed. I held my body like I hold a delicate chain. Steady hands. No sudden moves. The morning after my research sprint, I woke before the alarm with the rare feeling that I had not been chased through my own sleep. The sky was the pale color that makes everything look honest. Bento stretched, shook his ears, and trotted to the door. We walked the block in a loop I could do with my eyes closed. I passed the bar where I have too often turned one drink into two and decided to pass it again later with the same answer. Small choices, stacked, changed the grade of a day. Back at the table, I built a simple timeline from what I knew and what I could infer. Payments due, confirmations received, points where staged reductions could flip on. I added a second line for optics. When photographers like to shoot, when speeches are planned, when the band needs the light at full. The two lines crossed in exactly one place. If the system wobbled there, the photos would wobble with it. I didn't want chaos. I wanted leverage that did not harm the people actually doing the work. So I drafted an email to the venue manager in the most boring language I could manage, the kind that gets answered even on busy days. I asked for clarification on access zones for safety and whether any staged reductions would affect emergency lighting on stairwells. Safety questions get attention. They also force clear answers. I did not sign with my family name first. I signed with my work one. I wanted the reply on record, not on favor. Then I wrote a second note for myself about what I would not do. I would not raise my voice to be heard. I would not spend the evening proving I belonged. I would not chase cameras or conversations. I would stand where I could see the moving parts and keep breathing. If the wobble came, I would help direct it into a safe channel and let the image adjust itself. Later, if needed, I would draw boundaries with words that fit on one screen. No long explanations, no apologies. Just place the responsibility back where it belongs. In the afternoon, I tidied the apartment like I do before a big audit. Dishes washed, laundry folded, desk cleared. Anxiety has fewer places to stick when surfaces are smooth. I laid out my clothes and a spare pair of flats because blisters make people desperate. I set 2 bottles on the counter, water and tonic. I moved the gin to a high shelf and left it there on purpose, like a sign. Before bed, I read through the notes once more. Policies, times, names, points of failure. I touched the opal at my throat and felt the cool stone remind me that light moves even when I stand still. Bento circled twice and settled by my knees. I turned off my phone. The room went quiet in a way that did not feel like absence. It felt like space. Silence, I realized, was not the opposite of action. It was the room action needs in order to be precise. Tomorrow would be loud enough on its own. I had the plan, the proof, and the breath to carry both. The reply from the venue landed early, the kind of hour when inboxes move faster than people. The manager confirmed access zones in dry language and added a sentence about staged reductions that read like an afterthought. It stated that certain lighting arrays could be dimmed if a payment checkpoint wasn't met by a stated time, and that emergency paths would remain unaffected. I read it twice. It was the confirmation I wanted. The lever existed, and it had a clock. I forwarded the thread to Rafa with a short note. I said I needed a sanity check on the phrasing and whether the time window created exposure for anyone. He answered that the clause was standard, that the wording was clear, and that keeping records would matter more than speaking loudly. He advised putting my own boundaries in writing for the family after the event, not before, and suggested 1 page, 1 screen, no adjectives. I filed that advice where I keep tools that don't rust. I planned the day like a field visit. I walked Bento first, longer than usual, until the part of my mind that runs worst-case scenarios had burned off some fuel. Back home, I collected small things. A spare battery, a notebook with squared paper, a cheap laser level I use on site when people argue about straight enough. I ate something that wouldn't shake me later, moved the gin out of reach again, and left the apartment with the unremarkable calm that comes after choosing. The rooftop looked different without the close of night. Daylight exposes seams. I introduced myself to the desk with the neutral tone of someone who belongs anywhere they can be useful. I said I needed to check safety signage locations and stairwell lighting for a personal project. No one argued. I took photos of posted policies and the little metal plates people stop seeing after the first week. Voltage, load, last inspection. I timed the walk from the foyer to the emergency exit and back, twice because timing is a liar when you only check once. The manager passed by and recognized me from the email. He said the evening would be dense, that the schedule was tight, and that the team would make it work. I heard fatigue more than promise. He mentioned almost idly that a partial transfer had not cleared yet, and that if it arrived in the next block of hours, nothing would change. He was not warning me. He was resetting his own expectations out loud. It was enough. I stood near the freight elevator and watched staff move equipment, cables, trays. People who keep rooms alive have rhythms. They also have tells when timelines get squeezed. A lighting tech scrolled through a patch list with too much focus. A bartender counted glassware twice. The florist's assistant taped a note to a crate that sounded like a laugh when she wrote it, but read like a prayer when she walked away. None of it was doom. It was the sound of a system leaning. I took the long stairs down and walked the block to breathe. The street smelled like wet metal and distant bread. I messaged myself the times we had discussed and set silent alarms that only I would feel. On the way back in, I caught my own reflection and noticed the relaxed jaw I usually have to work for. The stone at my throat felt cool. I thought of how many nights I had tried to correct people's perceptions by talking. Today, I was cutting a cleaner path. Truth first, then words if needed. At home, I spread the day's pieces on the table like a puzzle I already knew the picture of. I drew a line for payment checkpoints and set beneath it the moments that made the event look effortless. The first round of photos, the toast, the couple's entrance to the song my sister had insisted on for months. The line of money and the line of optics met at a single hinge. The 15 minutes around the toast, when extra light made faces look generous and any dip would read as a mistake on camera. I did not need to cause a failure. I needed to make sure an inevitable wobble flowed into the least damaging channel. I prepared 3 small things. First, a practical note to the manager, framed as care, about keeping stairwell levels steady if staged reductions hit at peak crowding near the toast. Safety notes move people faster than status notes. Second, a tiny adjustment request to the photographer I knew from another job, an indirect suggestion through a shared contact, that a sequence of shots near the glass would be gorgeous earlier in the night, before the toast. It would give them beautiful frames even if the room shifted later. I did not mention why. Photographers love being early for beauty. Third, a message to myself. Eat, hydrate, rest. Precision dissolves when blood sugar drops. I ate real food, drank water, and lay down with Bento's warm weight anchored against my calf. Sleep did not come, but rest did, and that counted. When I got up, the light through the curtains had turned the soft color that makes metal look kind. I ironed my dress without rushing, laid flat shoes beside the heels, and packed a small tote that didn't look like a bag a person carries when they're about to argue. I left early again, not to prove anything, but to keep my hands steady. On the train, I watched people rehearse their faces in the window glass, and felt for a moment the old ache of wanting to be chosen. Then the car tilted through a curve, and the ache slid away like something unbalanced finally finding its level. At the rooftop entrance, the hostess did not remember me at first. Then she did, and reached for black. I accepted it without commentary. The band around my wrist was not a story anymore. It was a pass that let me stand where I needed to stand. The city below blinked awake, one window at a time. I breathed in 4s, held for 7, and let 8 carry the air out of me. The clock would do what clocks do. My work had been to know when and where to place a steady hand. The rest would be the room telling the truth it always tells when no one is shouting over it. I don't win things by force. I win by making the next right move easier than the wrong one. The day rolled forward with that sentence in my head. I checked the tote again. Charger, notebook with squared paper, flats, lip balm, protein bar, water. The gin stayed on the high shelf, out of reach and out of mind. I wrote a small list on a sticky note and stuck it to my phone. Breathe, hydrate, observe, document, leave. Rafa sent a final line during lunch, the kind that lands like a level on a crooked frame. He said clarity would anchor me more than any speech ever could, and that a boundary sent after the dust settles holds better than one thrown into the wind. I didn't need pep talk. I needed sequence. I answered that the lever existed, the clock was set, and that I would keep records clean. I caught the train early on purpose. Crowds slide my thoughts out of place. Empty cars let them click back in. I traced the timeline with my finger against the window. Arrivals, first shots, cocktail drift, toast, band, cake, exit. My hinge still sat around the toast. If a staged reduction hit then, it would show on faces. I wasn't aiming to expose anyone. I was aiming to protect the people doing the work and, by doing that, to protect myself from playing the old role of fixer without credit. At the rooftop, I stood in the seam between guest and staff and let the wristband do its quiet work. It put me where I needed to be. The manager's stride told me the partial transfer still hadn't cleared. Staff moved like a machine with one tooth chipped. The harpist tuned and retuned. The florist adjusted stems with the speed of someone who knows time is thinner than it looks. I started the small kindnesses that open doors. I held a C-stand while the lighting tech taped a cable. I shifted a crate with the florist's assistant so she could reach a stubborn zip tie. I asked the bartender if the side station near the terrace needed more glassware and carried a rack when he nodded. None of that made me anyone's favorite. It made me useful without making me loud. Useful people get told the truth sooner. When there was a lull, I confirmed the safety detail I had raised by email. I did it lightly, as if I were checking coat hooks. The manager answered in the same low register. Stairwells would stay at full. If reductions were triggered, they would start with peripheral wash and decorative spots, not emergency paths. He added a time that matched my silent alarm. He did not owe me that. He said it because I asked like someone used to reading maps. The photographer I knew by one contact arrived with a small team and a face that said the day was already long. I didn't mention money or reductions. I mentioned light and glass and how the sky was clean now. He adjusted his plan without fanfare and steered the couple's early shots to the terrace. Their best frames were banked before the clock could lean. I ate the bar I'd packed and drank water in the service corridor where air moved. Bento wasn't there to anchor me, so I counted steps and matched them to breath. 4 in, 7 held, 8 out, until my pulse agreed to be a partner and not a driver. I promised myself 1 drink maximum after the toast, and only if the room stayed steady. I was tired of buying tomorrow for a discount tonight. Guests filled the space in gradients. Ivory bands multiplied, black bands worked. My mother's compliments floated past like ribbon. My father's corrections clinked against schedules and moved on. My sister brightened in every reflection. I did not seek anyone's eyes. I kept mine on the hinge. Time closed in. Music softened into the shape that precedes speeches. The manager checked his watch and made a small motion to lighting. The team answered with muscle memory. A row of decorative uplights eased by a degree no guest would notice. Another row stayed firm. The stage stayed clean. The path lights held. The room was telling the truth, and it wasn't a scandal. It was simply less shiny than the plan. The toast began. Cameras rose. Voices smoothed themselves for story. My silent alarm trembled against my wrist. For a breath, the wash dipped and then corrected. Not a collapse, just a seam showing. The photographer, already holding the terrace frames, pivoted to tighter shots. The band leader, reading a room like a map, brought the volume up half a notch. No one outside the work would log the change. I logged it because logging is what I do. The important part wasn't the light. It was what the light gave me. Proof of a fragile system and proof that I had chosen to guide, not break. That choice would matter later, when words needed to be precise. I wasn't their staff, but I had staffed something. The flow from wobble to safe channel. After the toast, I allowed myself a single drink, slow and deliberate, more symbol than sedation. I stood where air moved and watched the room hold. Guests laughed in round sounds. Staff loosened shoulders by 1 notch. I felt the familiar ache to rush in and fix everything forever. I let it pass. I wasn't there to be a hero. I was there to be correct. On my way out, I stepped aside so a busser could pass with a tray held high, and he gave me the quick nod people give each other when the edge has softened. Outside, winter bit the corners of my cheeks. I breathed in cold that tasted like metal and clean. The plan had worked because it fit the truth of the night. Tomorrow would be for boundaries. Tonight was for going home with steady hands and a record that could stand on its own. After the toast, the room breathed like a stage between scenes. The shiny edge dulled by a degree most people couldn't name. It was enough for me. I let my shoulders drop 1 notch and shifted to the perimeter where staff reset glasses and guests reset faces. I measured the pull to step into family orbit. Old muscle memory said to circle until someone noticed I had come. I answered it with small tasks that belonged to me alone. A note in the phone about the light dip and recovery, a timestamp for the band's correction, a line that read simply, that safety levels held. Facts first, then feelings, if any. Across the room, my mother moved like a swan trained by mirrors. She stopped near me just long enough to let a compliment float. She said the evening had a glow that proved teamwork, which in her language meant that visible smoothness mattered more than how it happened. I nodded the way one nods at centerpieces. The compliment did not need a home in me. My father skimmed past with a timeline folded in half. He mentioned that precision wins nights like this, tone even, eyes already elsewhere. The sentence was accurate in a narrow way and useful to no one in the wider sense. I placed it on the shelf where I keep facts that do not change behavior. My sister held court near the glass, content arranged around her like props. She sent a handler to suggest that vendors keep to the service corridor for a bit so the couple could have clean frames. The handler's voice was practiced and careful. I considered arguing categories and decided my energy had better uses. I was not a prop and not a vendor. I was leaving soon by choice, not by order. I drank water and let the single cocktail grow warm in my hand until it was nothing. Sugar and alcohol were both bad accountants for me. They rounded errors up and called it relief. I wanted morning to arrive with clean books. Near the terrace, the photographer I'd nudged earlier scrolled through previews with a look I recognize in people who catch a moving target and hold it. His thank you arrived as a small tilt of the head. I returned it and walked on. Gratitude counts more when it doesn't turn into conversation I don't have to manage. Bento wasn't there to press his weight against my leg, so I borrowed steadiness from objects. I let my thumb find the cool curve of the opal at my throat. I rested my palm on the rail of the stair landing and noticed the faint notch where carts clip the same corner night after night. Rooms remember more than people admit. I stayed long enough to see the system hold through cake and the first song. The hinge had passed. Anything that broke now would be ordinary, not structural. That was my cue. I let the manager know, in a sentence shaped like courtesy, that the stairwells looked clear and that the earlier sequence by the glass would make the album strong. His shoulders moved the way shoulders move when a day stops arguing with you. He said the team appreciated eyes that look where hands are busy. I put the sentence in the drawer labeled useful and left it there. Outside, cold air erased the film of perfume and heat that clings to curated nights. I walked to the train feeling the familiar ache to explain myself to someone who would convert it into a story they could control. I answered it with breath counted softly behind my scarf. 4 in, 7 held, 8 out, until the want to explain became a want to sleep. At home, I did the simple things that keep panic from finding hooks. Coat on the chair, shoes in the rack, glass of water, leash on the table for morning. I wrote 3 short notes before touching the bed. The first was to myself. You guided Wobble to safety and did not disappear to do it. The second was to Rafa, unsent, thanking him for reminding me that clarity anchors better than volume. The third was the skeleton of a boundary for my family. 1 screen, no adjectives. I won't attend events where I'm labeled staff. I won't manage optics without name or credit. I won't discuss my work in rooms that turn questions into corrections. Send tomorrow, not tonight. Sleep came in pieces. When it broke, I didn't reach for the bottle on the high shelf. I reached for the dog who thumped his tail once and settled with a sigh that sounded like yes. Somewhere between that sound and the thin light of morning, I understood the shape of what I had kept. My work, my calm, my choice. What I had returned was the unpaid role of fixer for a story that never wrote me in. Morning found me before the alarm. The city sounded different after nights like that, as if the streets were clearing their own cache. I made coffee, put water in Bento's bowl, and let him nudge my knee until my head stopped listing to one side. I opened the notebook and read last night's 3 lines. They still held. I added a 4th in small handwriting. Keep what is true, release what is heavy and borrowed. I kept the boundary email as a draft. Words set too soon turn brittle. I wanted them to cure, not crack. Instead, I did ordinary things with care. Laundry in a single load. Dishes to the rack. Inbox to 0. Anxiety has fewer hooks when surfaces are smooth. I took Bento on a longer loop than usual. He knew the route that passes the tree that smells like everyone. He led me there as if to say that being part of a wider map is a good thing. By afternoon, the ache to be elsewhere turned into a plan I could carry. I texted the small group that doesn't need context, Rafa from contracts, Lucia from the nonprofit audit who bakes when numbers get dark, and Davy from the studio upstairs who fixes vintage radios. I wrote that I needed a quiet table, a bowl of something warm, and the kind of company that keeps phones face down. They understood without ceremony. We agreed to meet at Loom, the bar that knows how to turn the music down without making it feel like a favor. I walked there with my hands free and my thoughts not trying to outrun each other. At the door, the bartender lifted a chin in the way that says he remembers a person's name and their last bad week. I asked for water first, and the kind of soup that forgives you for being tired. I told myself I could order 1 drink after food, and only if it felt like adding color, not blur. I wanted to be present for the parts of the night that belonged to me. They arrived in a steady stagger, coats shaken, chairs pulled, shoulders dropping a notch when they saw the table. We did the exchange people like us do. The short version first, not for drama but for clarity. I described the wristband without decoration, the claws without heat, the hinge without triumph. I said I had chosen to guide the wobble instead of breaking the room, and that it felt like telling the truth with my hands. Each of them offered the thing they are good at without naming it. Rafa gave sequence. Send the boundary tomorrow around noon, keep it to one screen, and attach nothing. Lucia gave ballast. Eat more than you think, and sleep more than you want, because bodies hold math better when they're fed. Davy gave perspective. The radios that last are the ones with a little air in the signal, not a perfect seal. None of it required agreement. All of it felt like home. I let my one drink be a small gin with too much ice. It stayed cold long enough for me to notice my own appetite return in ordinary degrees: salt, warmth, bread. The second would have been easy. I left it on the menu untouched and didn't miss it. Relief arrived without the tax due tomorrow. We didn't toast to victories. We didn't name villains. We talked about tiny repairs that save larger systems later. A rubber foot under a rattling chair, a spreadsheet column that finally aligns, a radio that stops humming when someone who cares cleans the dust from its dial. That was the shape of the evening. No headlines. Just the kind of companionship that makes space where a person can set down their tools and still recognize their hands. On the way home, the air felt sharper in a good way. I thought about the rooms a person chooses and the rooms that choose a person back. Last night's room had labeled me useful and kept me at the edge. Tonight's room had left me whole in the center of my own life. The difference wasn't applause. It was ease. At my door, Bento wagged in a full semicircle. I sat on the floor beside his bowl and let him lean until he decided I was steady enough. I sent Rafa a single sentence that didn't ask for any more labor from him, just named gratitude. I set an alarm for midday and copied the boundary text one more time into a clean draft. One screen. No adjectives. Responsible parties named without weight over my own voice. Before bed, I moved the gin back to the high shelf. Not as punishment, as a reminder that some tools are for later, and most nights don't need them. I slid the notebook under my pillow the way a child hides a treasure that is simple and dear. Sleep came like a tide that knows its shoreline. In the quiet before it took me, I pictured the black wristband hanging on the small hook by my door, not as a curse, but as a tag I had recoded. It had started as a category. It had become a key. Tomorrow I would send the email. Tonight I let the good room echo once more and fade, leaving only the part that stays. At noon, I pressed send. The boundary email went to 3 people only: my parents and my sister. One screen, no adjectives. I wrote that I would not attend events where I was labeled staff, that I would not manage optics without name or credit, and that I would not discuss my work in rooms that turn questions into corrections. I added a single line noting the venue's safety clarity and the staged reductions policy, not as a dagger, but as proof that I pay attention. I signed with my work name. Then I closed the laptop and put my phone face down. I gave myself an hour with no screens. Laundry folded into clean stacks. Bento's blanket went in the wash and came out warm and smelling like soap. I made rice and eggs like I do on days that need steady fuel. When I turned the phone over, 3 responses waited. My father wrote the way he moves through calendars. He said that precision wins nights and implied that the family expects adults to be flexible. I filed the sentence in the same folder as always, accurate in a small way, useless in a wide one. My mother's message arrived with the tone of a bandage placed without permission. She called it a misunderstanding and suggested a talk when tempers cooled. My sister sent a short line crafted like a caption. She wrote that the important thing is the photo. None of it asked a question. None of it offered respect. None of it required a reply. I did not answer. Silence was the only sentence that kept shape. An hour later, the venue manager replied to my safety note from the night before. He thanked me for paying attention to exits when everyone else watched the stage. He added the exact time the partial transfer cleared and the moment the staged reduction began and ended. His numbers matched my timestamps within 30 seconds. He attached a short log entry for his files. I saved it to mine. A good audit is two people writing the same truth from different angles. Work pulled me forward. A small clinic needed help reconciling supplier invoices that never matched stock. I set up my table, checked my posture, and let the brain that likes puzzles take over. Outside, the city dragged clouds across the sky. Inside, columns lined up. When the clinic's director said by email that the report would save them from cutting hours, I felt the kind of relief that doesn't demand a performance. I logged the impact and moved on. By evening, ripples from the engagement night reached me through other routes. An older cousin sent a message that sounded like someone putting down a heavy bag. She had noticed the room dip and then recover, and she had noticed me near exits rather than in photos. She wrote that she understood. Another relative who rarely writes asked for my work contact. She had a friend whose small foundation kept losing track of grants. I said yes to an initial call. Doors make different sounds when you knock with your own name. I went for a walk with Bento at the hour when shops change light and kitchens start to smell like garlic and heat. The bar on the corner already had the low hum that can pull me in. I kept my promise from the night before: water first, food first. If I still wanted something after, I would choose with both feet on the ground. When I got home, I no longer wanted it. The urge had been more habit than hunger. The next morning brought the most useful message of all. The photographer shared a small gallery from the early terrace sequence. The frames were clean, faces open, sky unbroken. He wrote a single line that said the shift later would have hurt the set if we hadn't banked these, and thanked me without making it a debt. I stored the line as a counterweight for the future, for the days when the old story tries to say that quiet work does not matter. There were consequences, too. A family group thread went quiet for hours, the way a room goes quiet after a glass chips. Then the chatter resumed in a new tone, thinner and brighter. I knew that sound. It is the noise people make when they repoint a narrative without admitting it moved. I did not enter to correct or confirm. My energy has better uses. That night I moved the black wristband from the hook by the door to a shallow bowl on the entry table. Not a trophy. A tag I had recoded. It once meant a category I did not choose. Now it meant access to the part of the room where truth lives. I wrote 2 new lines in the notebook. The first said that boundaries are bridges when you build them clean. The second said that evidence is a kind of kindness when it keeps people safe. I slept without the dream where I argue in empty halls. Morning came quiet and square. Work waited. Life did too. I chose both. 2 days later, my mother proposed a family dinner. The message had the tone she uses for linen and seating charts, as if order could be set like cutlery. She wrote that it would be good to align feelings after such a special weekend. My father added a line about being practical. My sister sent a heart and a photo from the terrace set. I looked at the bowl by my door where the black wristband rested and decided I would go, but not to defend a past I no longer owed. I would go to observe, to place responsibility where it belonged, and to leave when the room tried to turn me into background. I arrived on time without arriving early. Early had been my old compromise. On the way up, I counted breath and let the elevator mirror tell the truth back to me. Steady shoulders, clear eyes, no need to apologize for existing. I had eaten before leaving home. Hunger is a bad accountant at tables like these. The house smelled like something that braises for hours. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen with the brightness she reserves for guests and difficult days. She greeted me with a careful kiss and said it was good to have everyone together. My father's handshake had the exact weight it always has. He said we would talk constructively. My sister appeared in a frame of perfect hair and said the engagement photos were already performing well. She added that content had to be protected from logistics. The words sounded like they had been drafted earlier. We sat. The table was arranged like a brochure for stability. White plates, low flowers, tall water. My mother opened with gratitude for family effort. My father moved to lessons about coordination. My sister summarized that minor issues had been smoothed, and that results were what mattered. I listened. Then I placed my 3 lines from the email on the table without adjectives, as if I were setting down utensils. I would not attend events where I was labeled staff. I would not manage optics without name or credit. I would not discuss my work where questions become corrections. I said the venue had confirmed safety and staged reductions, and that my note had been logged. I kept my voice in the register I use for audits that must be accurate, not dramatic. The first crack showed in the way my father's eyes moved to the wall clock. He said precision wins nights and implied that families require flexibility. I agreed that precision had won the night, for the staff who carried it, the manager who adjusted quietly, and the photographer who banked early light and said flexibility should not be code for erasing labor. He looked at his plate. My mother tried a word like misunderstanding. I replied that clarity is not conflict. My sister said the important thing was the photo. I said the important thing was respect. No one raised a voice. The room simply shifted as if some hidden beam had lost a fraction of its load. My mother asked if I was sure I hadn't misread the wristband. I said categories had been applied without malice, and that their effect was still real. My father asked if a boundary that firm might harm relationships. I said relationships already harmed by mislabeling don't get fixed by more mislabeling. My sister said the guests had not noticed anything. I said quiet safety is not supposed to be noticed. I did not offer receipts unless asked, and no one asked. That, too, was a kind of answer. Coffee moved the plates away. The conversation tried to soften into weather. I did not play along. I asked my mother if she wanted the contact for the manager to send a formal thank you to the team. She said she would think about it. My father asked if I wanted to consult on an upcoming charity gala. He framed it as a chance to contribute. I said I would consider any paid contract that credited me by name and did not ask me to be invisible. My sister suggested a joint post to smooth impressions. I said my work was not a caption. Another crack sounded, small but clear. The quiet of people realizing the old script had leaked ink and could not be reused without stains showing. I stood when I was finished eating. I said I had an early morning with a clinic that needed clean books, and that I was glad we had spoken plainly. My mother hugged me with the pressure of someone trying to make a shape fit. My father said we would revisit the topic. My sister said we should focus on the next event. None of those sentences required me to stay. Outside, the air felt like a square of fresh paper. I chose to walk a few blocks before calling a car. My phone vibrated with 2 messages while I moved under streetlights. The venue manager had forwarded the final log with a short line about team effort being easier when guests respect boundaries. The photographer had sent a note saying the couple had chosen 3 of the early terrace shots for the album cover. No favors were asked, no debts were written. Proof simply existed. At home, Bento did his full semicircle and then pressed against me until my breath matched his. I moved the wristband back to the hook by the door. Not a trophy, just a small tag that now meant access to the right side of the rail. I wrote a single sentence in the notebook. The room tried to keep its mirror. The mirror cracked. I did not. I slept the way I sleep after long reconciliations, not fast, but all the way down. The morning would bring work that answers to math instead of mood. The family would adjust or not. Either way, the story had shifted, and I had not needed to shout to hear it. The morning after the dinner, work woke me before the alarm. My inbox held 2 messages that mattered. The first came from the Rooftops corporate office. They had read the manager's log and wanted a quiet review of their staged reduction language across venues. They asked for a proposal, scope, fee, timeline. The second came from the small foundation that kept losing track of grants. They wanted an intake call and a simple engagement letter by week's end. I poured coffee, filled Bento's bowl, and let his tale set the rhythm while I wrote. Proposals are stories told in numbers. I outlined what I would do for the rooftop group: read policies, test them against real timelines, map risks that marketing language hides, draft a version that protects guests and staff without promising magic. I named a fee that made my shoulders sit level, no discounts for prestige, no invisible labor. I sent it and closed the laptop before I could bargain with myself. The foundation call was kind. They described good people caught in a bad system, spreadsheets that didn't match, receipts and emails, deadlines colliding like cars in fog. I explained how my work would move through their mess without shaming anyone. They said my tone made them breathe easier. I sent a one-page letter that fit on a screen. Scope, fee, dates, deliverables, no adjectives. By afternoon, the rooftop group replied with a yes, a formal contract, and an NDA. Legal language doesn't scare me, it steadies me. I read slowly, checked indemnities, payment terms, and credit line. In the signature block, they had written my name correctly and added a brief descriptor: forensic audit consultant. My body noted the lack of friction in that sentence. I signed with a firm hand and saved the PDF to a folder named with today's date. Bento thumped his tail against the chair leg as if he understood a threshold had been crossed. Consequences arrived in the familiar way. Sideways. My sister posted a carousel from the engagement with a caption about flawless execution and family teamwork. My mother commented with a sentence about grace under pressure. A cousin messaged privately that the post seemed pointed. I did not answer the post and did not join the comments. I posted nothing in return. Silence is not surrender when it sits on evidence. My father sent a separate email about that charity gala he had mentioned. He suggested I contribute as family, which in his language meant for free, and framed it as an opportunity to build goodwill. He implied that names look better when they are generous. I read the lines once and felt the old pull to earn place by erasing cost. Then I replied with a copy and paste of my standard terms: consulting by contract, fee due on receipt, credit by name on program and internal notes, scope defined before work begins. I added that I do not accept family rates that mean no rate. If they wanted a proposal, I would send one. If not, I wished them a smooth event. I did not check the thread again. The foundation returned the signed engagement that evening. Their director wrote that clean grants meant more clinics open on Fridays. Impact you can measure is the only applause I need. I printed the letter and placed it under a small paperweight shaped like a wave. The desk looked like a surface that could hold work and rest at the same time. I took Bento for a long loop under a sky the color of unpolished steel. At the corner, the bar called to me in the low hum I know too well. I kept my promise and walked past. At home, water first, then soup. The want to soften edges faded without a fight. Restraint felt less like denial and more like an investment with returns I could name. Sleep, clarity, steadier hands. My mother texted near midnight with a line about family unity and public perception. The wording was careful. She suggested a photo of the three of us at brunch to reset impressions. I read it twice and heard the request beneath the lace. I replied in 3 sentences that fit on the glow of my screen. I wrote that I am not a prop in other people's narratives, that I will attend family meals when respect is part of the table, and that public images without private truth are just pictures. I put the phone face down and slept. In the morning, a courier brought a packet from the rooftop group. They had overnighted a thumb drive with policies from 4 properties and a letter that said the quiet kind of thank you, the kind that acknowledges labor without writing me out of it. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote the first page clean. Scope, dates, names, risks, deliverables. Then, in the margin, a sentence to remember what signatures mean. A signature is only a line until the work behind it holds. I taped the black wristband to the inside cover where I keep reminders. Not as a trophy, as a label I had rewritten. It once meant staff without a name. Now it marked access earned by being exact when the room wanted blur. The contract sat beside it, ink drying. Consequences had come the way consequences always do when boundaries hold. Some doors closed, others opened cleanly. I stepped through the ones that matched my name. The week rearranged itself around the new edges. Some people leaned closer. Others found the door. My father stopped calling and switched to crisp emails. He wrote that generosity builds reputations and repeated his idea about the gala as family contribution. I sent my standard terms one more time and added no commentary. The silence that returned was useful. It meant the boundary had landed where it needed to land. My mother pivoted to weather and flowers. Messages arrived about centerpieces and a brunch she imagined would reset the tone. I read them as I read marketing copy. Intent first, wording second. I answered with logistics only. Yes to lunch on a weekday near my office. No to staged photos. Yes to a conversation that stays on respect. No to talking points. My sister posted steadily. Captions named perfection and teamwork. I did not correct the record. People who were in the room could already feel the seam where the plan had thinned. People who were not there didn't need me to turn my life into counter-content. The photographer's early terrace images began to circulate. They held without needing a story from me. Work filled the spaces where I might have argued. The rooftop group sent more files. The foundation scheduled interviews with staff who knew exactly where time went missing. A small clinic referred me to another. A venue in another neighborhood asked if I could review their emergency light policy before wedding season. Referrals feel different when they arrive because someone trusted your calm, not your surname. Bento kept his quiet watch. He learned the sound of me choosing water instead of gin. The glass, the faucet, the pause that follows. Nights without blur made mornings straight. Anxiety still showed up, but it found fewer hooks. I kept the leash by the door for long loops, and the notebook open for short lines. Proof first, then words if needed. I am not a prop. Sleep is a strategy. Therapy kept pace. My therapist said that endings rarely announce themselves. They become visible when the new routine stops hurting. We talked about grief for the version of family I had carried like a sketch. Naming it didn't erase it. Naming it made room for other drawings. Extended family found their paths. An aunt invited me to tea and asked about work with real questions, not traps. A cousin sent a message that said she had started therapy because watching you say no made me brave. An uncle forwarded a contact at a museum that had lost track of a donation stream. I put each note where it belonged. Gratitude, calendar, proposal. There were frictions too. A relative I rarely see hinted that I had embarrassed my parents. I did not defend myself. I wrote a sentence in the notebook instead. I didn't embarrass anyone. I refused to be erased. Some truths are for the page, not the thread. The gala inquiry went quiet. Then it returned with payment terms that matched mine, credit by name in the program, and a line that said my scope would be defined by me. I accepted without gloat. If they had come back with less, I would have let it go. Not every door needs your hand. One evening, I moved the black wristband from the notebook to a small frame on the shelf. Not as triumph, as inventory. It sits beside the signed contract and a photo Rafa took of Bento asleep under my desk. 3 ordinary objects: a tag, a paper, a dog. Together, they tell the version of this month that I believe. I don't feel finished. I feel aligned. The house inside me, rooms for work, rooms for rest, rooms where I can be seen, has been measured again. Some furniture moved, some windows opened, one door closed that always slammed anyway. The family will become what it becomes with or without recaps. I will keep what is true and return what is borrowed. Tomorrow I start the rooftop audit in earnest. The spreadsheet is already labeled. The pen is already uncapped. Bento is already asleep at my feet, and the room is quiet in the way that means I can hear my own name. The audit started on a Monday that smelled like rain and hot paper. I cleared my desk the way I clear my head. 1 stack for policies, 1 for timelines, 1 for the notes that aren't ready to belong anywhere. Bento curled under the chair and made the quiet sound he makes when the world is safe. I opened a new sheet and wrote the header the rooftop group had chosen: policy review, staged reductions, guest safety, and underneath it, in smaller type, the sentence I work by: proof first, then words if needed. Files moved through my hands with the calm of a train that knows its track. Some venues had language that promised too much. Others hid the risk so deeply it became a rumor. I drafted the version in the middle, the kind that keeps people safe without turning staff into magicians. When I finished the first site, I felt the good ache that follows work that fits. I emailed the draft and stood at the window long enough to let my eyes rest on nothing. Responses came in before noon the next day. Legal liked the clarity. Operations liked the timing grid. Marketing asked if the wording could sound warmer. I shifted 2 verbs and left the spine alone. The contract did what contracts are supposed to do when they are honest. It carried weight so people didn't have to. The foundation's grant ledger fell into place the same week. The missing links were not malice, just drift. Approvals in inboxes, receipts in screenshots. Weeks lost to habits that never got named. I trained 2 staff members to keep a column clean and gave them a checklist that fit on one sheet. The director wrote that Fridays could stay open. I printed that line and taped it inside the notebook where I keep reasons to keep going. Family shifted at the edges, as families do when a pattern loses its utility. My mother suggested lunch without cameras, and for once, kept it that way. She asked about work with real questions and listened to answers without converting them into a story about herself. We did not touch the word apology. We touched the word respect enough times that it began to hold. My father sent the gala contract with my fee and credit line exactly as written. I signed it as easily as I had signed the rooftop deal and did the scope carefully, leaving no space for me to disappear. My sister kept posting. The early terrace image sat on the cover of her album, and I let the photo be only a photo. The friends who know how to hold a room gathered on a Saturday night that came with a breeze. We ate bowls of warm food at Loom and traded the small victories that never make headlines. A cleaned dial in a radio, a grant approved, a comma that saved a week. I let myself order 1 drink and left half of it melting in the glass. Relief did not need help. It was already here. At home, I framed the wristband and set it on a shelf beside the signed contracts and a photo of Bento asleep under the desk. 3 small objects. 1 story. A label recoded. A signature that means what it says, and the quiet animal who keeps my feet on the floor. I looked at the shelf and felt the tiredness that signals something finished, not broken. I wrote 1 last page for this month and kept it simple. I wrote that boundaries are not walls. They are table edges. They tell you where the plate goes, where the cup rests, where tired hands can put a fork down without it falling. I wrote that family can be invited, but not allowed to rearrange the furniture while you're in the kitchen. I wrote that work is not the only proof of a life, but it is a clean mirror when people try to blur you. When I closed the notebook, the room did not echo. It held. I set an extra chair at my small table and called it a habit, not a hope. Space for the next good person, the next good project, the next version of me who knows how to leave when a room insists on turning me into background. Bento thumped his tail once and went back to sleep. This is where the story ends and continues. Not with a spotlight, not with a speech, but with a surface cleared for the next honest thing. If you stayed with me through all of it, thank you. If this story felt like a map you could use, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you think. And if you're building your own table, keep the edges clean. The right people will know where to sit.